All right. Well, welcome everybody. We're very glad to have you. I think we're going to have some more folks joining in as we get going, but we've already started the recording, and I would like to, as I admit people, let them in. Amanda Epting and I are joining from MIT D-Lab as the tech facilitators for today. So if you have a challenge, just let us know. And our guest of honor here is Ms. Jona Repishti. So I'm going to turn it over to her to get us started. Welcome.
Well, hello everyone. Good afternoon and good evening, and I hope that everyone is doing well. It's good to see everyone in this call. I bet it's been a busy day, and for many of us, it's at the end of the day. So just really excited that you're making time to be part of this session. So a little bit about myself. I'm the Social Entrepreneurship Manager at MIT D-Lab. MIT D-Lab is a small lab at MIT, and where we work with partners around the world to advance inclusive innovation, participatory design, and also practical solutions to global poverty challenges around the world. And this year in particular, I've been working on something that's called Scale Up X Simulation, and it's a gender smart fundraising training, and I'd love to share that with all of you and get some feedback today. So over the course of the next hour, we'll be doing four things. Set a little bit of the context. What is the need for this particular tool? Talk a little bit more about our methodology and how we developed it, give you a little bit of a teaser of what it looks like so you can get your hands on it and play around with it, and finally get some feedback and talk about ways in which you can engage. But let me start with a story. So we have two founders from East Africa. Winnie, she's the founder of Kwangu Kwako, which is a safe, affordable, modular structure. She builds them for informal settlements in Kenya. And there's also Dismas Kisulu. So he's the founder of Solar Freeze, which provides small-scale farmers with affordable solar power cold storage units, and these help the farmers really lower post-harvest loss. So these were two founders that were part of the Scale Up Fellowship about 2 years ago, and they were at that inflection point where they were coming in and they were ready to fundraise for their businesses to help them scale. And I was really curious, what would their fundraising journey look like, and what would be the outcomes? Well, there's a really interesting study that was done by IFC and also by Village Capital and Wi-Fi around the same time. And they actually took those questions and looked at them at scale. And one of the maybe not so surprising findings was that female founders really raised about 2.6 times less funding than their male counterparts. It's a pretty depressing statistic, but perhaps to people that work in this space, it's not so surprising. The thing that was surprising about this study, however, was that they looked at what the amount of funding that women had at the beginning of the acceleration process, and also what the outcomes were at the end after they'd received investment readiness training, after they'd worked with mentors, et cetera, with accelerators around the world in emerging markets. And what they found was that actually being part of an accelerator, being part of a training program, widened rather than closed the gender financing gap. At the beginning of the acceleration process, women had about 1.6 times disadvantage, and that gap grew to 2.6 times after. So certainly something was amiss, something about the way that we work with female entrepreneurs. We weren't quite meeting their needs with these programs. So what are the challenges here? And the implications are quite dire. IFC again estimates that there's about a 300 billion gap for female founders that are working in emerging markets and globally. And about 70% of women-founded businesses are underfunded. And not just that, but they receive lower valuations and they have poor outcomes in terms of being undercapitalized in the long term. So this is a really pressing need. And increasingly, we're finding out that we're just not meeting the needs of female founders. So now, to do a little bit of interaction and get us to talk with one another, we're going to do a really quick 5-minute breakout room. Share if you can help me put everyone into groups of 2. Just take a second or 2 to say hello and say your name. But then I invite you to just talk a little bit about the prompt, whether you have some experience or whether you're just guessing or bringing information from what you know around women and leadership in general. I'd love for you to talk about, what do you think are the barriers that female founders face along their fundraising journey?
Great. Opening all rooms now. If you have any troubles, feel free to call a facilitator and we'll pop in.
Technology can be both an enabler and a barrier. And then we also said social norms and family responsibilities.
Amazing. That's already a fantastic list. I can't believe you came up with that in just 5 minutes. So thank you for sharing. Does anyone have anything to add or to, yeah, please.
So Sarah and I were in a room and came up with a very similar list. We added that, frequently we're too emotional. The kids' life balance, women are viewed as more risk adverse, whether that's true or not. A lot of these connections into the old boys clubs, those kinds of things, as well as the education and the ego that Karen was mentioning.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing, and it's great. And I'm glad that you started having these rich conversations, and also it was an opportunity for people on the call to get to know each other. So I asked those questions because those were the ones that we used to go on a learning journey about a year and a half ago. There's a lot of literature, particularly around founders that are based in the US and Europe and what's holding those female founders back. But we really wanted to look at what the experience was like for female founders in emerging markets. So we talked to about 50 of them that had raised anywhere from $50,000 of equity and debt funding, but mostly equity, but also some ecosystem actors, investors. We did a particular focus with investors in India, and also accelerators and incubators. And the findings were quite interesting. The biggest takeaway, and you really hit it and already mentioned a lot of these, was that the women's journey was really quite different in multiple fundamental ways of the journey of the male founders. But it was also surprisingly similar across different types of contexts and different types of female founders. First of all, it was full of bias. Some of these were explicit and very visible, and a few of them were unconscious. Some of them came from the outside, and some of those were things that female founders themselves were slowly realizing that there were biases that they held because they were part of a context that they were born and lived in. There's lots of non-inclusive and unsafe spaces in which women participate when fundraising, when going to conferences, etc. And also networks are also not quite open in the same way to female founders. Time poverty, etc. But also the other interesting thing was that there's all these unique drivers and motivators that women have that might be slightly different from their male counterparts. So one of the things that women mentioned was that there's really few opportunities to acknowledge and really discuss how to address these barriers. And particularly in accelerator programs, there's a lot of talk around leadership, but none around these really tangible things. The takeaway number 2, and this is not women specific or not gender specific per se, is that entrepreneurs enter fundraising with really asymmetric information and big power dynamics. They really learn as they go, and it's too late. And one person used the analogy of a bike, which is why I have this picture here, is you can see all these PowerPoints and someone can explain to you in detail how to ride a bike until you get on it and you do it, and you kind of learn those little intricacies of how to move, etc. You won't know how to do it. But we expect founders to go and do it right away. So all of these little things around structuring deals, negotiating, figuring out the unknowns and knowns, there were really no ways to really get to know that. And the costs of the mistakes was usually you find out after. You become an expert when you don't really need it. So the challenge that we had before us at D-Lab was how can we both design and deliver a truly inclusive investment readiness program that meets the need of female founders? And the 3 design criteria that we used were, one is to move from the one size fits men, or what is themes as gender neutral programming, to something that's a little bit more inclusive or women's lens. The other one was to move from the sage on the stage, that this is how you do and how you solve these complex ways of understanding investors and negotiating terms and figuring out your long-term funding map, to something that's a little bit more experiential, where you learn how to do it. And in the process, you gain the skills and the confidence. And the other is, well, can we get it from something that's really high touch and localized to something that we can scale a little bit more globally? And what we came up with was simulation-based learning. Has anyone done a simulation before? And if they have, is anyone feels comfortable sharing or explaining what that is? Or is everyone new to what a simulation is?
So I see Sarah raising her hand. Sarah Sterling, I don't know if you want to share.
Sarah, go ahead.
I mean, the simulation-based learning that I've used is actually, it was called a walk in their shoes. And so it basically took you through an entire experience of being either basically putting yourself in the shoes of another person that has a completely different life than you do. So either a person with disability or BIPOC community person, or even like a child in a foster home, just to like have you interact with others, being that, taking on that personality. So very much like a virtual reality without the crazy goggles, more simplified platform. Mm-hmm. I'm looking for the website so I can share it with you guys. It's a really interesting company that does it.
I have not heard of that one in particular. Yeah, I see another hand. I'm sorry, I can't see your name, so I can't call you, but yes, please.
I guess I'm the only person with the screen running. So my name is Ian, and I do improvisational theater, and I do it as a teaching tool. For those of you at MIT, I'm up at Greentown Labs, so I'm happy to come in, mask permitting. It's a great deal of fun, but it's also putting people in the place where they have to make decisions based on not anything else except the information immediately in front of them. So they don't have all the information. They just have to make, and then they get to see how it plays out. And so a lot of improvisational based learning becomes simulation based learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Those descriptions are both spot on. So what simulation is it's a microcosm, a tiny little universe that compresses time and space and allows participants to experience a multitude of scenarios and then immediately learn from them. So they're really popular in business schools. So if someone has done that, there's all these kinds of business management simulations. They're popular in nursing school, flight simulators, in aviation. You don't want to have someone to fly a plane for the first time. So there's these really technical fields that they've really taken a stronghold, but there's very few applications in emerging markets, and particularly fewer in the field of entrepreneurship. But it seemed like something really promising, and so this is what we decided to develop and build in all this rich knowledge that we've been collecting through the interview. So I'll tell you a little bit more of, well, what exactly does that mean? So as I mentioned, they provide this environment where you can learn from experience, but it's a very safe space, a safe container, a sandbox. And it really allows you to get immediate feedback and understand what your knowledge gaps might be as well. So I was able to find only one other investment readiness simulation that's been built by an amazing group that's called Strategy Tools. It's based out of Norway, and they have something that's called Scale Up. And it is built on the infamous, the most Monopoly game, as you can see from the board, where you go through a series of challenges and prompts, and you learn about investment fundraising in that way. The scale-up simulation that was very much built around really high growth unicorns and very much businesses that don't have quite the unique models that we work with in emerging markets. So we took this existing simulation, and we've been collaborating with Strategy Tools, And we stripped it down. We kept some of the scaffolding and we made it for emerging markets. We really built in a gender journey, which didn't exist. And we also added a lot of cards, revised tools, etc., to create this really unique experience that we're gonna dig into really quickly. So basically what happens in the simulation? So the goal is to raise $5 million US in equity. And usually if you are an emerging startup, that means multiple rounds of funding. You don't immediately get $5 million US, you have to get a seed round, then a Series A, etc. So it's simulation in which you get multiple rounds of funding. And during it, there's two embedded experiences. The first one is that you make real investment choices. You encounter investors and term sheets and you pick which ones are best for you and you learn how to segment them and see what that means for your business. And the second layer is that you begin to grapple with a series of realistic gender-based scenarios. And you talk about them in a group. So I'd love to invite you to get a little taste of what some of this content looks like. So this is a tip of the iceberg of this really kind of complex simulation. So, and it's actually quite robust, particularly around the technical skills. So I'm going to give the people on the call an opportunity to pick. You can either work on the gender scenarios or you can work on the technical skills. So if you feel like you want to dig into and look at some little term sheets and things like that, you can do that. So the first thing that I'm going to do, and we're going to do this on Miro. So I don't know how familiar people are on Miro, but you can use it, you can put post-its. Basically, there's three main functions that I want you to know. The first one is at the very top, there's a people finder. So you can follow, I won't be on it because I'll be sharing my screen, but you can follow Cher or Amanda, and that can help you kind of figure out where you are because it's a big white space. On the side, there's a toolbar, and there, this kind of like the second button is a post-it note. So you can kind of use that and click on it and then drag it and use that as a way to kind of express and put notes of what you're thinking. But if you do get lost in the Miro space, then you can also use the box in the very bottom to zoom in and out and see where things are and where others are. So Cher, have you been able to put the link on the chat and do you see people on it?
Cher, you're on mute. She did drop the link into the chat and I just brought everyone to me. You're welcome to unfollow me on the board, but I just tried to orient you as to where Jona was talking about with the two scenarios.
Great. So we will also send you a PDF. If you're struggling with Miro, you can still be on your group and you can open up that PDF and read. So when it comes to the gender ones, I've put a few gender cards that we use in the simulation. In groups of 3, if you decide to work on the gender aspect, you can pick one of those cards and discuss. How do you feel about it? What are some of the solutions that you can use to come out of it? If you decide to focus more on the technical skills, then the prompt is slightly different. So we ask you to read 4 investor cards and then pick which one is right for your early stage startup and why. So you can read a little bit more detailed instructions on the board, but we'll give you, I would say, maybe 13 minutes to just get a taste, play around, and talk in groups of 3 about these challenges. So before we send you off, any questions for me? It seems like no questions. So perhaps Cher, what you can do is put people in groups of 3 and
Opening all breakout rooms now, groups of 2 or 3.
This was something that was developed in 1984, and his theory is that a new learning starts with a concrete experience. Then we can reflect on that experience, see what the results are. Then we figure out, well, what do these results imply and how do you influence these outcomes? And then you take that hypothetical learning and that reflection, and then you embed it later on into the future actions. And so the scale up experience is really built to encapsulate all 4 of those steps to really create concrete learning by doing. And we're really hoping to build out 2 types of skills on the gender and women's lens by putting forward realistic scenarios that we've collected and that we know that women face. We hope to really build awareness, preparedness when you encounter them in real time, but also resilience. How do you respond to them when you do encounter them? Sometimes it's difficult to change the situation, etc. And on the technical side, we really hope to build comfort and a little bit more insights on, what do these difficult and complex economic control terminology, cap tables, and things like that. How do they really affect the long-term growth map of your company? And then how can we build a strategy that will allow you to scale? How can scale up be used? So it's meant to be either virtual or in-person experience, and you use it with groups of individuals anywhere from 6 to 20. They take a role play of companies, so they all are different types of companies, and they're all trying to get $5 million multiple rounds. It is meant to be a booster to existing accelerator programs, schools, conferences, etc. It's not meant to be a comprehensive end-all program, but it's something that can be used to really test what knowledge gaps exist and also boost and come alongside the existing curriculum and content. The other thing that's interesting about it, that it's modular and adaptable. If you want to focus more on the technical content, or if you want to focus more on particular gender scenarios that you think that participants are struggling with, as a facilitator, you can build the experience around that. And it is facilitated, and it can be either facilitated by the accelerator lead or someone external that can learn how to use it, or it can be someone can invite a scale-up trained facilitator from the DLab team or the strategy tools team. But it's really meant to be modular and like a bag of Lego bricks that you can really use it to test out and to really build different types of knowledge. So what's next? So we have a prototype of this scale-up X simulation. Some of it is the content of the cards that we showed you, so you can take those and use those. There's also a bunch of canvases that come along with it, and there's also the board. And in the next 6 months, we'll be doing some short demos like this, but more focused on the content. We'll be doing a couple of day-long simulations when you get to experience the simulation from start to beginning. And we're also working on developing a certification program for people that want to learn how to use it and make it a part of their toolkit for working with entrepreneurs and investors. So there's other ways in which we think that we can engage, but I'd love right now to open it up to questions, reflections, thoughts. I know it's just a teaser, but yeah, I'm curious to get some feedback. And Cher or Amanda, if you can also drop the Miro link again. There's also an opportunity if you don't get a chance to ask your questions in the next 10 minutes, but you want to leave your email or a way that you think we can collaborate, please include that directly in the URL and we'll follow up accordingly.
Great, thanks, Jona. We do have a question from Amy Meadows. She asked, is the game available somewhere? So I think that was addressed somewhat in the slide beforehand, but if there's anything else you want to add to that, Amy, and Jona can address it.
Yeah, that's all. So it's right now, it's a very much like a facilitated simulation. And so someone that delivers it, we want to make sure that they're equipped to be able to utilize it. So right now there's actually a small internal team that knows how to kind of deliver it. And we're looking for other people that, want to be trained and then want to deploy it. But right now it's very much in testing mode. There's components that we've added to it, but we really want to test it out with entrepreneurs make little tweaks. So the next year is all about prototyping and refining and tweaking, and then being able to kind of launch it and disseminate it more broadly. I think that certain components of it, like particularly just like the different card decks, etc., we can send out and they can be conversation starters, but we're figuring out what the modalities of engagement will be with this really rich toolkit.
There is another question from Karen that says, are there geographic areas where you are interested in testing it? Thanks, Karen.
So as I mentioned before, it's meant to be, there's basically two things in mind that we use to develop it. So one, it's in emerging markets. So a lot of the scenarios are emerging market kind of scenarios. And I know that's very broad, but there's enough richness and similarity across that we think that it can work in multiple contexts. And the other thing is that it's meant for inclusive businesses. So these are businesses where the impact scales alongside the business case. And so usually they're working with people living in poverty, and they're employing as part of their value chains people living in poverty. So rather than geographic kind of focus, we're mostly interested in like testing it out with inclusive businesses. And so right now we're talking to a couple of accelerators and also other potential partners. The other thing that we've been thinking about is, well, what would it be like for investors to use it as well, and to step into the shoes of what it is like to be a female founder and experience that fundraising journey through the eyes of a female founder and work through those scenarios. So it's very much kind of a blank canvas that we hope to think about. But most of the content, and most of the networks that we do have are in East Africa and India. So if people have other suggestions and other places or people we should connect to, please by any means send them our way.
Dan, do you want to go ahead and share your comment out loud?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I just want to congratulate you because it's really interesting game. I really enjoyed it. I was with Amy and Sarah, and we did both of the games, and it was really interesting. I just wanted to mention I work with Jenica Sen Consulting. We help mission-driven businesses get capital on their own terms, and I love the game. I love gamification as a tool to teach about a lot of things. I'm actually a facilitator of Climate Collage too. And I wanted to tell you, I don't know, do you know Climate Collage?
I don't think so, no.
Check them out because they actually have grown so fast. I mean, I think that the organization was created in 2018. And right now there are over 4,000 facilitators in 50 different countries, and the game is in 25 different languages. So they've grown so far. They have used swarm techniques, and I think you should really look them up. They are now doing a crowdfunding, I think. So let's take this conversation. I mean, we should talk more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're hitting all the things that I'm curious and I want to hear about. And you know, it's that kind of network that works across multiple geographies and is building a toolkit for entrepreneurs. And I love the term that you use, is basically fundraise on their own terms and be empowered. And it's interesting because when we developed Scale Up X, we really wanted it to work on two levels. Of course, create these spaces and these containers for entrepreneurs to have these conversations that they just were not having, and these experiences in other places, but also empower accelerator programs to have this opportunity to facilitate these kind of conversations and be better intermediaries in that journey between connecting entrepreneurs and investors to really kind of like bridge that gap. So yeah, I'd love to connect and shoot me an email. It sounds like a great opportunity to discuss further.
Totally. I'll share my email here just in case. But anyways, I'll reach out to you too. There was one more thing. Oh, also, and this also, I mean, I extend this opportunity for most of you. I am in Mexico, and I do work a lot with SDESOs in Mexico. So if you are also interested, I think that many of them will be interested too. They are always looking for tools of workshops to facilitate. So we'll talk more about that too.
And do you do investment readiness content in particular?
I don't know. I'm kind of new. I've been 2 months in the company. We mainly focus on helping the entrepreneurs to get to funding. We do have content, but most of it it's only for the people that are in the community. We are we are actually right now creating a Facebook groups where we will share some content, and we do have some free resources. But I'm not sure if we have investment readiness. We do have an investment readiness assessment tool.
It's like a vast, yeah. Okay. Great. Well, I was just a little curious, and we can definitely take this more offline. So we're almost at time. I want to see, is there anyone else that has any thoughts, comments, and please also use the Mural board to keep engaging and leave your email.
There is one more, again from Karen. Karen, do you want to share out loud? I think it's a great question.
Sure. I was just curious, what are some applicable ways that women entrepreneurs can use this simulation to actually impact their own fundraising practices?
So it's in 2 ways. One is around the gender scenarios that we know that they will encounter. So we hope that will build, one is more awareness of, what is something that could be appropriate, inappropriate, what are our interpretations of certain things that we encounter, how do we react to them, etc. So it's more kind of like on the awareness. Then build preparedness, like if you do encounter something slightly similar, well, how can you work with that, and what would be your responses so you don't freeze or react to it in certain ways. And also build resilience. Do you step out of the process if you encounter things that are challenging, or do you keep going back, and how do you do that in your terms? So it's kind of on the gender side. And on the technical skills, this is really robust in helping you really understand term sheets, how to segment investors, how to build cap tables and calculate. There's math and things that are involved, so it can get quite complex quite quickly. But again, it's what a real investment journey would look like. And if you don't know and you don't understand how much equity, for example, you're giving away, that can have really bad ramifications down the road. So we hope that it can really marry the technical content and these gender awareness pathways and these gender pathways that women encounter. So I hope that answered your question.
That was great. Thank you. I think I'll follow up with you separately over email.
Wonderful. Well, when we are exactly on time, I do think that this is one of the first times that I've been able to plan and deliver in a timely way. But I'm just so grateful to all of you that were here and engaged and had this conversation today, and hope to follow up. And thank you again for your time. And I wish you all a wonderful afternoon and evening.